Hello everyone, welcome back to Elite Tales. Here we discover the emotional and captivating stories about Elon Musk. In this video, we will capture the heartwarming moments of famous entrepreneur. Before we begin, I request you that please subscribe our channel for more interesting videos. It was the heart of winter, and the park was blanketed in a thick layer of snow, the kind that sparkled like diamonds in the pale sunlight. The crisp air stung against the skin, and the trees stood bare, their branches heavy with the weight of frost. People bundled up in heavy coats, scarves, and gloves hurried along the pathways, eager to escape the biting cold. Elon Musk, despite his global influence and the vastness of his responsibilities, had decided to spend the afternoon walking in the park. He loved the quiet of winter, the stillness that only the season could bring. It was the one time he could feel truly at peace, away from the endless demands of his work. Today, as the snowflakes gently fell from the sky, he found himself lost in the beauty of the winter landscape, breathing in the chilled air and letting the coldness clear his mind. As he walked deeper into the park, the muffled sounds of the world around him seemed to fade into the background. But then, something caught his attention. A sudden, sharp noise, almost like a cry, broke through the stillness. Elon froze. His heart skipped a beat. He turned his head toward the sound, his instincts kicking in. He followed the noise to a cluster of trees on the edge of the park, their bare limbs casting long shadows over the snow-covered ground. There, in the snow, lay a small, fragile creature, its tiny body struggling to move. Elon's eyes widened in shock as he realized it was a squirrel. But something was horribly wrong. The squirrel was writhing in pain, its body shaking violently, its legs twitching in unnatural angles. It had fallen from one of the trees, and the impact had left it badly injured. Its fur was matted with snow, and it could barely lift its head, its tiny eyes filled with terror and pain. Elon's heart dropped as he took in the sight. The squirrel was alone, and the cold winter air seemed to be intensifying its suffering. Without a second thought, Elon rushed over to the little creature, his breath visible in the air as he knelt beside it. He had dealt with rockets, artificial intelligence, and the world's most advanced technologies. But nothing in his life had prepared him for this. The squirrel was a living being, helpless in the face of such overwhelming pain. He couldn't just walk away. "Hey, little one," Elon whispered, his voice soft as he gently reached for the injured animal. He carefully scooped it up, his hands trembling slightly from the cold, but more from the gravity of the situation. The squirrel flinched at first, its body trembling under Elon's touch. But then it seemed to relax just a little, as if sensing that the human in front of it meant no harm. Elon looked around, desperately trying to find help, but the park was eerily empty. No one was around to offer assistance, and the nearest vet or animal clinic was miles away. With no time to waste, Elon did the only thing he could think of. He carefully wrapped the squirrel in his scarf, the soft fabric providing warmth and a sense of security. He held the tiny animal close to his chest, his heartbeat steady and calming. His mind raced, thinking of all the ways he could help. But at that moment, the most important thing was getting the squirrel out of the freezing cold and somewhere safe. Elon hurried back to his car, the small body of the squirrel gently cradled in his hands. The snow crunched beneath his boots, and the chill of winter cut through his coat. But all he could think about was the tiny life he was holding. He couldn't let it die in the cold, in the snow. It needed help, and it needed it now. As he drove to the nearest animal clinic, he could feel the weight of the squirrel's fragile body against his chest. Its tiny heartbeat was faint but steady, a sign of hope. Elon's heart ached for the little creature. He'd never experienced such a raw and urgent desire to help something so small, so vulnerable. In that moment, everything else seemed irrelevant. His companies, his fame, all of it faded away. All that mattered was this tiny life in his hands. When he arrived at the clinic, he didn't waste a second. He burst through the doors, holding the squirrel close to him. The staff, recognizing him immediately, rushed over. "What happened?" one of the nurses asked, her voice filled with concern. "Elon? Is that a squirrel?" another nurse asked, her eyes wide. "It's hurt. Badly," Elon replied, his voice tight with emotion. "Please, can you help it?" Without hesitation, the staff took the squirrel from Elon's hands, gently placing it on the examination table. The warmth inside the clinic was a stark contrast to the cold outside, and for a moment, Elon allowed himself to breathe deeply, his hands still trembling from the experience. He stood at the side of the room, waiting for any sign that the little creature would be okay. The nurses worked quickly, their movements precise and steady. They carefully checked the squirrel for broken bones, injuries, and signs of internal trauma. It had a broken leg, a bruise on its side, and was clearly malnourished and dehydrated from being out in the cold for too long. But as the minutes passed, the staff assured Elon that the squirrel's chances of survival were good. It was small, but it was strong. The doctor who had treated the squirrel looked up at Elon, her face soft with empathy. "You did the right thing by bringing it in so quickly. The injuries aren't as severe as we first thought. We'll keep it here for a while to rest and recover." Elon nodded, his shoulders slumping slightly with relief. "Thank you. I couldn't just let it die out there." The doctor smiled gently. "You saved its life. It's not every day we get someone like you bringing in an injured animal." Elon didn't know how to respond. He wasn't looking for praise. He didn't care about recognition. All he cared about was that the squirrel would make it. As he turned to leave the clinic, a strange sense of calm washed over him. He had done something simple, but it had mattered. The tiny creature had been saved, and it was all because he had chosen to act in the face of its pain and fear. Elon walked out of the clinic with a deep sense of peace that he hadn't expected. The rush of activity from his daily life always kept him focused on bigger projects: SpaceX, Tesla, Neuralink, and everything in between. But today, something so simple had left a lasting impact on him. It wasn't just about the squirrel, it was about how one small act of kindness, no matter how fleeting, could change the course of an entire life. As he drove home that night, the quiet hum of the road under his tires provided a stark contrast to the chaotic, fast-paced world he usually inhabited. It was in the solitude of that drive that he realized that his most significant moments often weren't defined by technology or progress, but by moments of vulnerability and empathy. The way the squirrel had looked at him when it was in pain, the way its tiny body had shaken as it fought for survival, had stayed with him. He thought about all the times in his life when he had been too caught up in work, in the rush of deadlines and meetings, to truly connect with the small, everyday moments that made life so beautiful. The next few days were filled with updates from the clinic. They sent him photos of the squirrel, now beginning to eat on its own and grow stronger. Elon would check his phone between meetings, watching as the tiny creature's health improved with each passing day. There was something about the squirrel's recovery that made him feel as though he had done something right. It wasn't grand or spectacular, but it was deeply meaningful, and it reminded him of the importance of showing compassion. By the time the squirrel was fully recovered, Elon had come to a decision. He wanted to visit the forest again, to see the squirrel released back into the wild, free to live its life as it was meant to. It wasn't just about helping it heal, it was about ensuring that it would have a chance at life outside of the clinic, outside of the pain and fear it had once known. He reached out to the clinic, and they agreed to meet him in the same forest where the squirrel had been found. On the day of the release, Elon made his way through the snow-covered park, a place now full of memories. The air was cold, the kind of bitter cold that cuts through you, but he didn't mind. His mind was occupied with thoughts of the tiny creature that had managed to crawl its way into his heart. When he arrived at the meeting point, he saw the clinic staff waiting for him. The little squirrel was in a small carrier, its eyes bright and alert, seemingly eager for freedom. Elon approached the cage and smiled at the sight of the small creature. It had a scar on its leg from the injury, but it looked strong now, its fur sleek and its eyes full of life. It was as though nothing had ever happened, as if it was meant to be here, in this moment, on this snowy day. The staff opened the carrier, and Elon knelt down, gently coaxing the squirrel out. It hesitated for a moment, but then it scurried out of the cage and darted toward the trees, its tiny paws leaving faint tracks in the snow. Elon watched it go, his heart swelling with emotion. This was the moment of true freedom, the moment when everything that had been wrong was made right again. For a moment, the squirrel paused, turning to look at Elon. Its small body was perfectly still in the cold winter air, and it seemed to study him, as though understanding the kindness he had shown. Then, as if satisfied, it turned and scampered up the nearest tree, disappearing into the canopy of branches. Elon stayed there for a while, watching the squirrel blend into the forest, its small form swallowed up by the woods. He stood tall, his heart full of a quiet joy, and he let out a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace that had been missing in his life for a long time. As he walked back to his car, the crisp air biting at his skin, he reflected on the events of the past few weeks. The simplicity of the moment struck him again. The act of helping the squirrel wasn't about getting recognition. It wasn't about being a hero or standing out. It was about doing what was right in front of him. It was about making the decision to be kind, to take action when it was needed most. And that decision had led to something far more important than any technological achievement. In that moment, Elon realized how easy it is to overlook the small, meaningful moments in the rush of life. His entire career had been dedicated to solving big problems, changing the world, advancing technology, making life multiplanetary. But in his pursuit of those monumental goals, he had sometimes forgotten how important it was to pause, to notice the small things, and to act with compassion. He thought of all the projects he was constantly juggling, all the breakthroughs and milestones he celebrated, and yet it was this tiny creature, this small, fragile life, that had left the deepest impact on him. He couldn't help but think of how many people, much like the squirrel, were going through struggles of their own. Silent battles no one saw, fights for survival in the cold, whether physical or emotional. It made him wonder how many of them were just waiting for a small act of kindness, for someone to show up when it mattered most. How many of us are living in a world so fast and loud that we forget the power of slowing down and extending a hand to those in need? As he reached his car, Elon felt a newfound sense of purpose. It was clear that the world needed more kindness, more compassion, and more awareness. We are all in this together, no matter how different we may seem. The simple act of saving a squirrel had reminded him that kindness was a universal language, one that transcended boundaries, wealth, and status. It was the glue that held society together, even in the most difficult of times. The winter air was bitter, and the night sky stretched endlessly above him, speckled with stars. For a moment, Elon stood still, letting the silence wash over him. The world felt peaceful, almost as if time had slowed down to give him this rare moment of clarity. It was in this quiet space that he realized how often he took his privilege for granted. The warmth of his car, the food on his table, the security of his life. But many people didn't have those luxuries. There were families going hungry, children without homes, and animals without shelter. And yet here he was, worried about the next project, the next milestone. The squirrel had reminded him that sometimes it was okay to step back and focus on the simple things in life. Maybe success wasn't just about how much wealth you could accumulate or how many records you could break. Maybe it was about the lives you touched, the ways you made people feel, the moments of connection you shared with others. Over the next few days, Elon couldn't stop thinking about the squirrel and the lesson it had taught him. He decided to take action, not just in the grand, world-changing ways that were expected of him, but in the quiet, simple ways that mattered most. He began reaching out to organizations that helped families in need, donating his time and resources to causes that supported those struggling during the winter months. He knew it wasn't enough to simply wish for change. He had to be the change. But beyond the charitable acts, Elon also realized that his own life needed to change. It wasn't just about doing good things for others. It was about living with intention, with awareness, and with kindness in every action, no matter how small. The world didn't need more distractions, more noise. It needed more people who were willing to stand still and see the beauty in the simplest of moments. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Elon sat alone in his office, reflecting on how he could continue to bring about change. He thought of the children, the families, the animals, the people whose voices went unheard and whose needs went unnoticed. He thought of the squirrel and the pain it had endured, and how a small act of kindness had brought it back to life. He thought of how many others too were struggling in silence, waiting for someone to reach out and make a difference. The thought haunted him, and he found himself unable to turn away from the reality of how much needed to be done. But this time, he felt different. He wasn't overwhelmed by the enormity of the task. Instead, he felt a sense of responsibility, a responsibility to do more, to be more, and to act with even greater purpose. The world didn't need another billionaire chasing endless goals. It needed individuals willing to use their influence for good, to lead with compassion and empathy. In the days that followed, Elon put these thoughts into action. He began working on new initiatives aimed at helping those in need, focusing on providing shelter, food, and resources to families struggling during the winter. He used his influence to bring attention to the issues that often went unnoticed, working with organizations to support communities in need. And he did it not for the publicity, not for the recognition, but because it felt like the right thing to do. As the winter months wore on, Elon found himself more connected to the world around him. He saw the value in the small things, the smile of a child, the warmth of a kind gesture, the comfort of a hand offered in friendship. He saw how those simple acts of compassion could change the world, one person, one moment at a time. And through it all, he never forgot the squirrel. That little creature had unknowingly shown him the true meaning of success, not in wealth or accolades, but in the way we choose to live, in the way we show up for others, and in the kindness we share. It was a lesson he carried with him every day, reminding him that the greatest achievements in life are not measured by what we accumulate, but by the love and care we give. As winter passed into spring, the world slowly began to wake up from the cold. And just like the squirrel, the world too began to heal. People were kinder, more generous, and more willing to offer a helping hand. It was as if the lessons of the season had brought them closer together, reminding them that even in the darkest of times, there was always room for hope, for love, and for the simple acts of kindness that make life worth living. For Elon, the squirrel had been more than just an animal to rescue. It had been a symbol of the power of compassion, of the ripple effect that one small act of kindness can create. And as he continued on his journey, he knew that this lesson would stay with him forever, guiding him, shaping him, and reminding him that sometimes the greatest impact we can have is through the quiet, unseen acts of love that touch the lives of others. And in the end, that is how the world changes. Not through the big, flashy moments, but through the simple acts of kindness that each of us can give every single day. As the seasons changed, so did Elon. The lessons learned from that small act of kindness, the simple rescue of a squirrel, remained with him, guiding his actions and decisions. It was a powerful reminder that even in the midst of success and ambition, it's the small moments, the acts of compassion, that truly shape the world. Through his actions, Elon showed us that no matter how big or small, every gesture of kindness matters. Whether it's helping a wounded animal, giving a hand to someone in need, or simply showing love and care, these moments have the power to change lives. So, as we continue our journey through life, let's remember that the greatest impact we can have is through our compassion, through reaching out to those around us, and through the small acts that make the world a better place. If Elon Musk, a man known for changing the world with technology, can take time to help a little squirrel, surely we all can find ways to spread kindness in our own lives. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Let's continue to spread kindness, one small act at a time. Until next time, take care of each other and never forget the power of love and compassion in making the world a better place.